Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, finally.
Do you have trouble getting on?
Well, last time, yeah, I had a lot of trouble. I don't know if it was just a new version of Zoom or something, but yeah, I had to move over to my laptop. I had to abandon my PC.
Yeah, I had to use my iPhone for the last meeting, Ken.
Yeah, something was weird, but it seems to be working now. So,
Well, let's blame Spectrum.
yeah.
We are streaming live. We're recording and streaming live. So I'm actually, Monica's having an issue. So just give me 1 second. I'm trying to get her into the call. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
Are we waiting on anybody else?
Justin. I don't have my list. And Monica.
Is Stacy Howard on?
Oh, Stacy. I'm waiting for Stacy too.
Um,
There's Monica.
If we want to get started, or do you want to wait a minute or two longer for Stacy to log on?
Well, we're 6:35. I think I'll get started because I'll be repeating some of what I said at the beginning of the last meeting. So Stacy will have time to catch up. So welcome everyone to the February 10th meeting of our PRRC in Troy. I will repeat some of the comments I made at the beginning of Monday's session for people who are new to the meeting. So as many of you are aware, the origin of this collaborative is an executive order issued by the governor last summer. The particular structure of each community's PRRC is left up to that community based on relative factors in their respective community. In Troy, we've had a number of efforts underway prior to the executive order, and I felt it was important not to lose the momentum on those matters. I felt it was important to get them completed or at least well along before embarking on this exercise. I also want to say that I don't see that reinventing is an event as much as it is a process. And so I am not approaching this exercise as something that concludes once the report is submitted to the state. Although I can't say exactly what form this will take moving forward, there will be an ongoing and organized dialogue among those in criminal justice, mental health, substance abuse, and the community at large, and perhaps others. I think that's an absolute necessity if we're going to build enduring trust and effective responsiveness to the needs of our community. So this PRRC in some fashion will continue subsequent to the April 1st date. That's the date by which we need to submit a plan to the state of New York. As it happens, the chief and his leadership team have been engaged in a series of changes in the department since they assumed their respective roles. And much work was done this past summer to advance those changes. I'll give you some examples. It includes the reworking of our use of force policies to make them consistent with the 8 can't wait principles, We've also reworked our discipline policies so that they link more seamlessly with the newly reconstituted Police Objective Review Board. We completed the State of New York accreditation process, which only about 30% of the departments in New York State have accomplished. It is one of the governor's recommendations. We have, in fact, been accredited for 20 years, and this summer we went through the reaccreditation process. We reinstituted the Emotionally Distressed Persons Response Training, EDPRT. This is an intense 40-hour training. We are very mindful of the tragic incidents around the country this year between police officers and individuals in emotional or mental distress. We want to make sure our officers have the right tools for those sorts of situations. Our last class was in December. About 50% of the department has now completed that training, and we intend to offer 2 more sessions in this year, 2021. We've rewritten policies and procedures for the Police Objective Review Board to ensure that it is a citizen-led initiative, and we've recruited new members for that board. We are on the cusp of deploying body-worn cameras. The cameras have been acquired and are being set up by the vendor. So we've already begun the work of reform and reinvention. We are a step ahead. So now we move on to building on that work through this process. And at this time, what I'd like to do is introduce our Chief of Police, Brian Owens, to say a few words. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Owens, and I'd like to thank everyone for being a part of this meeting tonight. Some of you may know me and Deputy Chief Dan DeWolf personally or professionally. We have worked closely with people throughout the neighborhoods of Troy for many years, and that has continued in our current roles. The Troy Police Department is a full-service, New York State accredited law enforcement agency. Some of you in this meeting have likely interacted with the men and women of our department, whether in the ordinary course of your life, as a result of the call for service, or during a serious incident. We are fortunate to have caring members who are willing and dedicated to serving others. We demonstrate this through our actions and attitudes every hour of every day during thousands of interactions each year. We are grateful for the strong support of our community members and strive not only to keep people safe from crime, but to also help people in ways big and small. We're also fortunate to have our partners on the committee, and we are especially thankful for the people and resources that your organizations offer to the people of Troy and beyond. Well, this meeting and the ones to follow in the next several weeks are in the context of the New York State Executive Order 203. The Troy Police Department has had ongoing conversations and collaborated with our community, including the neighborhoods and organizations represented by the speakers and committee members for many years, in some cases decades. We have evolved over time to better serve the people of our city, and we welcome this ongoing dialogue to find ways to improve as a police department. We also look forward to continuing to listen to members of our community on ways to address issues of crime, disorder, and injustice. Our goal is to make Troy a healthier, better, and safer city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. On our website, on the PRRC page, we have posed a few thought-provoking questions. The idea is to be looking forward, exploring new possibilities. You will note that the questions all probe for constructive ideas for change. I will also note that the schedule going forward envisions 2 types of general meetings. The first are simply meetings where anyone can sign up and speak, such as tonight's. There will be a total of 3 of those meetings. Tonight's is the first. And then there will be 3 separate meetings reserved for affinity groups. These are groups who have organized around community issues, including community policing and public safety. We are particularly interested in what these groups would like to say to us, and we want to honor that by giving them an opportunity to share the benefit of their thinking and their discussion on these matters. The first of those meetings was held this past Monday, and a link to a recording of that meeting can be found on the city's website. Finally, please know that there are a number of ways to communicate with the committee. Public meetings are only one. We encourage written comments that can be mailed or emailed to us. All of that material will be shared with the committee and become part of the public record. So if public speaking is not your thing, you can still share your thoughts and ideas. Again, I want to thank all of you in advance for your participation and critical thinking. At this time, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for these meetings, Tamara Gatchell. Tamara runs her own company called Creative Cadence. And over the years, she has done a good deal of work with Fred Miller of Khalil Jameson, who many of you know. Tamara has been extremely helpful in bringing this together. So at this time, I will turn it over to Tamara.
Good to be here with you tonight. Let's take a look at our agenda for this evening. So we have heard welcome comments from Mayor Madden and from Police Chief Owens. I'm going to just cover some process guidelines. Then we'll move into the public comment portion of the meeting. We have 10 people who have signed up to speak to the committee. And then when the public comment period is done, we will then go into some working time, transition for the committee members to have some working time together. So as far as process notes for tonight's meeting, committee members, if you could please mute when you're not speaking. If you are using a phone, you can mute and unmute by pressing *6. Those of you who have signed up to speak, you will have 3 minutes to address the committee. Speakers will be unmuted one at a time, and I will give you a heads up when there's about 10 seconds left of your 3 minutes. There will be 2 additional public forums. One will be held on the 17th and the other on the 22nd, and they will both be from 6:30 to 8. It's important that you register to attend via Zoom, and you can sign up to speak. There's a sign-up form found on the website, and it's important to remember that you have to do that by 3 p.m. the day of the forum. The affinity group meetings and the public forums are being live streamed, and they will be recorded and posted also on the website, as well as the full schedule of all of the committee meetings. So as the mayor mentioned, you can connect with the committee not only through these public forums, but also through email or through postal mail. And those questions that he referenced are posted on the website. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John Salka, the Director of Communications for the City of Troy, and he is going to introduce our first speaker.
Okay, our first speaker is Stephanie Armstrong. Stephanie, I am not seeing your name in the list of attendees. I see a Stephanie Ryan. Is that the same? If you could use the raise hand feature to indicate that is you. Okay, Stephanie Ryan, Stephanie, oh, there she is. Hold on one second. Look, she changed her name. All right, hold on one second. We're gonna unmute you. Go ahead, Stephanie. You have to unmute your phone. Okay, I'm going to move on to Marcus Nix is next. After Marcus is Doris Day. Doris, you can unmute and you can go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have questions in regards to the thinking, the language that's being used in some of the conversations, because nowadays language is very important. A lot of people are saying about having community policing, and I think we need a little more clarification on what some people think as community policing, because from various conversations I've had, some people think that community policing falls strictly in the hands of officers, and that at some point entails a motive where an officer can enter your home violently or take control of situations. Whereas I think we need to have some clarification as how people are thinking in terms of community policing. Another issue I have is well, I haven't seen all of the I guess ideas that the community has put forth for how we're going to do this police reform and reinvention. I'm also worried about the wording of defunding police, because that has a very negative connotation. A lot of people think that, and even maybe some officers may think that that means that they're not going to get the resources that they need. But we're having a lot of conversations about mental health. And police are just like if you or I were to show up. We're not trained mental health facilitators. So therefore, I don't think that calling the police for a child running away or maybe sometimes domestic incident should be the first line that we use. I think we need to begin to look at how we're going to, I'll say, reallocate funding, because we do need to look at how other communities have now addressed this issue within their societies. Like they have different programs, they have different acronyms for them. You know, STAR is in Denver, and that's where social workers, in conjunction with the police and other community organizations, address issues that are happening in the community. Because the police are supposed, in my thinking, are supposed to address issues of crime. It seems now that we're asking police to address social issues, and I don't feel that all officers are necessarily trained to do that. I also would like to have ideas addressing of how police are trained to interact within the community, because it seems lately that we have a
Doris, you have about
militaristic,
10 seconds.
okay, a militaristic attitude when we're encountering one another. So those are my issues at this time in regards to how we're going to reinvent this collaborative. And also, can you give me a little idea where I can see what the committee has put forth? You said it's on the PPG site or something, where people can see what the committee is putting forth right now, what they're proposing. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Doris. So the information.
Thank you, Doris.
The information is
website,
on the website. Yes.
the website for everyone listening is www.troyny.gov/policerrc. We were looking for Marcus Nix. I don't see Marcus on the list. So next up will be Stephen Frost. After Stephen will be Lindsay Hall. It appears Stephen Frost was on the call. He's dropped off. So we are going to go to Lindsay Hall now. I believe Lindsay was on earlier. It also looks like she's no longer on the call. Next is, I'm looking on the list here, Rafael Varela.
Hello, everyone.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I would like to address the committee, continuing on the words of one of the participants in the last hearing, which said, if you want to build trust with our communities, you have to hold yours accountable also. And I am here today pretty sad to see that the composition of this committee, how late it was called to be put together, and the fact that there are 12 white people, only 3 black or brown people, no foreigners, no Latinos, no Hispanic, no members of the LGBT community. It already sends a message of discouragement for us to trust you in this process. I do have to acknowledge that this administration is much better than any other one we have had before. I've been in Troy since 2003, and I've seen big improvements. It is still lacking a lot in trust. The actions of this administration with respect to not answering the FOIL request for the disciplinary records of police officers, for example, it shows this administration does not want to cooperate with the law that was ordered by New York State to release the discipline records of police officers, for example. We also do not understand why Troy for Black Lives Matter or Equality for Troy have not been part of this committee. So we see a lack of representation. And this problem of systemic racism in this country was created by white people, not by black people. So we do not understand how do you believe that 12 white people, without paying consultants or somebody to teach you from what point of view can you even start to see this problem, are going to even be able to address this issue? Because the issue is not your opinion, it is the point of view from which you can even have an opinion. Because white privilege creates a bubble for you not to see the problems. And an example is some of the comments that some of the members of this committee have already done, like the chief of police saying he doesn't believe there's any problem with racism in the Troy Police Department, or Mrs. Mantello saying she wishes she would go back to the days of her father. And I understand she may not see the problem. And that's the pure definition of white privilege. She doesn't see it because she didn't have to see it as I have to see it.
Raphael, you have about 10 seconds.
So my experience or the experience of Black people is very different than your experience. So you need to get somebody to teach you how to even be able to look at things from that point of view before you can even have an opinion on the matter. Thank you for your time. I wish I could have more time.
Thank you, Raphael.
Up next is David Banks, and after that is Nancy Klepsch. So I'm going to put David on now.
Hi. Thank you. My name is David Banks. I reside in Ken Zalewski's district, and I'm a member of the Troy DSA and our Defund the Troy Police Department working group. As you know, 11,000 people came to the streets of Troy in support of a singular message, that Black Lives Matter. It should have been loud and clear that this was the overwhelming sentiment of the city, and yet we have heard next to nothing from the mayor's office, the city council, or this new committee really acknowledging this reality. But here's what I did hear. I heard Councilmember Zalewski recall how happy he was to work with Officer Christopher J. Johnson on community policing, and wondered out loud why more of that sort of work does not get done. The answer is quite simple. Officer Johnson, who is one of 5 Black officers on the roughly 130-member force, to quote the Times Union, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city, the department, and deceased former police sergeant Randall French, alleging he endured systematic racism in the agency and that it had caused his career and personal life to suffer. In that Times Union article, it describes a violently racist department where he was asked to smile so that people could see him in a dark room, and was not given overtime by PRRC member Chief Owens because of poor performance, even though he did not receive a single complaint. In one particularly disgusting event, to further quote the Times Union article, Johnson was showed a coworker a photograph of his daughter from her high school graduation. And that was when the late Randall French interrupted and asked Johnson how his daughter looked naked. Now, many people on this committee have worked hard to preserve the name and legacy of late Sergeant French. And while my heart goes out to his family, it is disturbing that more effort has been put into covering up his murder of Edson Fevenen than to deal with the racism in the department. In the meeting earlier this week, I saw no acknowledgement whatsoever that the problem is this bad or that lives are at stake. It was, to say the least, disturbing. My colleagues at the DSA worked in partnership with Troy for Black Lives and Equality for Troy to develop the kinds of clear and fundamental changes to the department that are needed, and I find it very disappointing that none of these groups are represented in the PRRC. We have been loud and consistent in our messages, and so I can only interpret this as a deliberate attempt at ignoring the grassroots activists that have spent their lives trying to create a better Troy and a better America. And so nothing will change until organizations such as Troy for Black Lives and Equality for Troy have a seat at the table in places such as the PRRC. I would encourage everyone listening to study our demands at defundtroypd.org/demands and see how reasonable they in fact are. There will be no reform or reinvention without reconciliation. And we can only do that with a full reckoning of the murders and bodily violence that the Troy Police Department has waged on the people of Troy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Nancy Klepsch, and after that is Keaney Conley Wilson. So I'm going to put Nancy into the meeting. 1 second. Go ahead, Nancy.
I'm unmuted. Thanks for taking my
Yes,
question.
you are.
I really respect the committee, but I do want to ask and say that, you know, for years, the LGBT community has had a complex relationship with the police in general. So I would like the committee to help me to understand how you're going to address the unique needs of the LGBT community. That's my question.
Okay. Nancy, what we're going to do is we're going to, the committee's going to go into a working session at the end. We're not responding at this time, but we are going to have some working. So we will bring that question into the committee work
Okay.
at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, Keaney Conley Wilson is next. Go ahead.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, it looks like my audio's on.
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, my comment really is around why community members aren't really being included in this committee, why some of the demands of community grassroots organizations have not been considered, why they weren't invited. I think a lot of these issues can be resolved by communities coming together and proposing different solutions. And we really just want justice and making sure that our neighborhoods are safe, our communities are safe, and that requires us to feel safe with, you know, with whatever structure we have in place for protecting everyone. So I really want you to, I really would love Troy to take on some of these demands that we've been asking folks to abide by with Troy for Black Lives and Troy DSA, a lot of organizations that have been doing this grassroots work. And I just don't understand why these plans, these really thought out issues and solutions haven't been considered, and why that is. And yeah, I really want us to be standing together and making sure that the communities are safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keaney.
That, we have reached the end of the list. There were five individuals that had signed up to speak. Several of them were on the call and then they have dropped off. So I will keep my eye out for them. I'll defer to the committee if they join afterwards, we'd like to loop back around for those folks to give their comments.
Okay, thank you, John. So at this point, we're going to transition into time for the committee to work. On the agenda for that is we're going to look at what did we learn on Monday night, and then what did we hear from the folks that came to speak for public comment. What we'd like to do, though, at the outset is just see if there's any points of clarification with respect to the public speakers that came to speak to the committee. Okay.
This is Renee. This is Renee Powell. I'm not sure if Nancy was still on the phone, but she had the question about what the committee, how a committee would address the LGBTQ community issues, but she didn't say anything about what those issues were. If she's still on, could she share what issues she's majorly concerned about?
John, do you want to?
Yeah, hi.
Do you want to see if Nancy? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the clarifying question. The LGBT community has a long history of a complex relationship with the police in general in the United States, and I point to things such as Stonewall and the Stonewall riots. But in today's modern times, we do have to think about our Black transgender community and its experience in the world and society and the violence it faces, and perhaps greater education. I do have to say, to be honest with you, although I have worked as a community member, a neighborhood organizer, and a neighborhood association president, as an out lesbian, I too have had once or twice an interesting experience with our local police as it relates to me and my life. And I do think that at times the police needs some greater education in terms of who we are. I mean, quite frankly, most of the time the police that serve our community don't live here. When I was a neighborhood association president of North Central, often police didn't really know the difference between our youth, who are our youth that were working with us, and then others who were working against us, so to speak. And sometimes that might be the case now. I'd love to see more community police. I'd love to see an out police officer and see greater recruitment. Obviously, the issue of Black Lives Matter is paramount and is top on my mind. But as an out lesbian, I do need to advocate for my community. Did that clarify?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Okay, at this time, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you to.
Okay.
As we
Thank you. I'd like to
open
just
the committee work.
I'd like to just begin by encouraging anybody who has plans or ideas, or Nancy, if you want to put a finer point on some of your comments, to submit them to us in writing. They do become part of the public record. And in fact, often they're more valuable than verbal statements, because sometimes we can't write fast enough to capture everything you're saying. So if we have it in written form, it's much easier for us to understand and to work with. So there are places where you can submit that on the city website. I would strongly encourage you to do that. So as Tamara mentioned, at this time we'll go into committee discussion. Our aim for the committee is really twofold. First It's to assist us in vetting ideas that are presented by the public. Are they viable? Could they be effective? And how could they be resourced? And secondly, I'm looking to identify opportunities to collaborate with the Troy Police Department to improve public safety services in the community. So one of the speakers tonight referenced perhaps the police not going on all calls that they go on now. So, you know, is that an opportunity for collaboration? Is there an agency? Is there a way to bring some of the people on this committee together with the police department to look at it at a different way of responding to those calls, as an example? I would like to say, just take a moment and say how the members on this committee were chosen. They were chosen because they bring experience either in the criminal justice system or because of those who they work with, who frequently interact with the police and the criminal justice system. They were asked to serve on the committee to help us imagine how ideas brought to us by the public might be actualized, and to create greater transparency and trust, leading to a more welcoming and safe community for all of us. I know that not every interest group in the community has a representative on the committee, but every interest group in the community has been invited to share their thoughts and ideas with the committee. My intention was to put those thoughts and ideas in front of a group of people who could make them a reality. So the design of the committee was very intentional. It would be small enough to be nimble, but it would also be positioned to help us pull the levers that are necessary to create the change that we're looking for. Going back to Monday evening, I think there were three main themes that emerged: transparency with law enforcement, improving community relations, and trust. And a number of the comments that we heard this evening fall into one of those three categories, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that moving forward. Time permitting, I'd like to start digging into a couple of these to develop a clearer understanding on the committee and talk about what additional information might be needed. Now, at the last meeting, there were statements made about re-entry or reintegration programs, and it sounded to me as though they are not very robust in Rensselaer County, and that services needed to be sought in Albany County. I wonder if we could get some information on what exists and what more needs to be done. And I'm guessing DA Donnelly would probably be the person to start with, but I suspect the police and probably Kevin O'Connor and maybe Laura Bauer have something to add as well. But Mary Pat, if maybe you could get us started with a better understanding, and don't assume that I know anything. So if you could start with a basic level understanding, I would appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you, Mayor, for letting me speak on that. I apologize to the committee and to the community for not being present on Monday night, but I did have a chance to review the discussion that took place. And there was a specific discussion regarding reentry. And we do have a parole reentry program in Rensselaer County. We have had one since 2007. Casey Hull is our current director. She works right in my office, and she serves about 125 clients a year, or individuals coming home from a state prison sentence. She serves a wide range of needs for these folks, from medical benefits to Social Security benefits, to transportation vouchers, to housing, and of course, to attempt to find them a position where they can find work ultimately. Prior to COVID, she was holding job fairs 4 times per year. And most of these employers were what we would call employers that cater to justice-involved individuals. And that would be people that are coming home from state prison. And these particular folks who are a part of that job fair specifically look to put folks like that to work in the community, sometimes outside of Rensselaer County, but in the surrounding community. So we have a very active program. Some of the folks that get hooked up with Casey are referred to her if they've signed a waiver of information when they're coming home from state prison. Others reach out to her. So what I started to think about when the group from Monday was saying that we didn't have this program is what can we do to make sure that more people know it exists? Because I think the people who are coming out of prison and signing those waivers and allowing that information to be transferred to Casey are being served. There was a specific comment about if Joseph's house is full, they have to go to the mission. And that's not inaccurate, that there may be an emergency stay at a location outside the county, but all of the services that are being provided are provided within Rensselaer County for these folks that are looking to re-enter our community. So on another note, Casey Hall has been a model throughout the state, and you can ask anyone affiliated with DCJS and the reentry program. Her work is a model for other counties. So I'm very proud of what she does. I've said this many times. We have, almost 30 people in our office that work to put people in prison and hopefully do more than just that. But Casey's the only one there to welcome them on the way out. So it is a vital program, and she does an amazing job. So I want everyone to know that that program is there, and it is doing very well. So I think, at first my knee-jerk reaction was to say, wait a minute, you don't know what you're talking about. We absolutely have this program. So that is one fact. But the second thing that I think as a committee we need to look at is, why does the community at large not know that it exists? So that, folks who are not getting referred to Casey immediately at the end of their sentence can come home, and if they're struggling, they know where to reach out. So that's something I think we can think about, because obviously employment and medical attention and transportation are the things that are going to maximize the chances that we don't see recidivism. Incidentally, I know that Casey Hull is on this call, so if anyone had any specific questions about that, I don't know how the format works, but she'd be more than happy to speak to any of that. So thank you for letting me clarify that, and I hope that I didn't get too detailed, Mayor. I hope I made it very straightforward for you.
Well, this is Renee Powell. In the same vein as Patrick said, I know nothing about the programs, and so in terms of what Casey does, is Casey the only one that works in this program? Does she have a staff? How is you've already stated that this program is a model program for the state. Just what is the makeup of that office that she serves in, that capacity?
You're muted. Mary.
As I was saying, Renee, she's a one-woman show, and that's the irony of it, is that the funding is there on this side for prosecution, and then when someone is coming out, we've got one person to work with all. I mean, she works with many outside agencies, and she contracts with many agencies to do what she does, but she does this solo, and she really does do an amazing job.
So if we're serving 125 people, do we know how many people are coming back and not availing themselves of the service? And if we did better on communicating it and we had a bump up of 50%, could Casey handle that? Are there resources to do that? Do we need to look for additional resources?
Well, that's certainly a timely question, because we have had, and I think somebody alluded to it on the call the other night, the possibility that funding may be cut from DCJS going forward after everything that's going on with COVID. But yes, that is something that she and I have discussed. What can the county do to supplement? What could we do within the office to supplement? And I think that's what we need to explore. I don't know that we have a hard number of how many people are coming out that have not signed those releases to get the information to Casey. So it would be a goal, I think, to let the community understand that this vital service is there. And I know that Casey does a great job of managing her clients. And I think if she needed help, I think she knows how to make that happen. And she knows she could come to me, and she knows how much I value the program. And it was something that we could think about, funding may need to be allocated toward assisting people there.
Mary Pat,
Yes.
is that a process that is strictly a county process, or is there a city level that could partner, or other level of government that could partner with that process?
Well, it's a state grant that serves individuals who are being released from state prison. So
okay.
Casey has always said if someone reaches out to her who's being charged from Rensselaer County Jail, she doesn't turn them away. So Casey's always willing to point people in the right direction. I know she goes above and beyond. She's often answering questions about landlord-tenant law and making sure that people are being treated fairly. So she is an amazing resource, and I do think that resources allocated to her are something that could really help.
Is the job fair available to others, or like how does the job fair component work?
Well, the one that's coming up in March will be virtual. So people will have to sign up. Previously, it was held at Hudson Valley, and it would be advertised to, to the public. Anyone can go, but the understanding was that if you're someone who is coming out of state prison, that you wouldn't be turned away by all of the employers. These are employers that are going to welcome you, irrespective of your background in the criminal justice system.
Are there accommodations for the virtual nature of that if they're coming out and might not necessarily have connectivity or accessibility?
And that's something Casey helps with too. I mean, she makes a lot of great points. Sometimes people come out. She had an individual who was out after 30 years. They don't know what a cell phone is. They don't know how to use a computer. So these are some real hurdles that, and again, I've got a one-woman show trying to help with this, and she does an amazing job of getting them hooked up with the things that they need.
Mary Pat, it's Chris Burke. Would it be helpful if there were more opportunities for people to actually access affordable housing or direct employment assistance leading to competitive jobs and those kinds of things? The reason I'm asking that is I'm aware of some funding opportunities that are competitive grants that Unity House is already providing housing. Us or maybe some other agencies that we work with closely could apply for these grants and get some more housing directly usable only by people re-entering from the criminal justice system. Would that be helpful?
Oh, I'm sure that would be very helpful. Absolutely.
Same thing with employment, I assume.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we can definitely talk about. And I spoke with Casey at length today, and she's more than willing to meet with anybody on the committee to talk about the specifics of what she does and what we could collaborate on. She's an excellent collaborator. As many of you know, she's involved in a lot of the work that is done in the county for folks like this. But, we're always willing to explore any new options that can enhance the service.
Mary Pat, this is Kevin O'Connor from Joseph's House and Shelter. And hi, Casey, how are you? I was on the original iteration of the task force back in 2007, along with Deputy Chief Dan. I'll repeat what I said on Monday. I've been in this work working with folks who are homeless now for 37 years. And I think it's a shame that homeless services are really a foundation housing option for folks that are released, but that's the reality we're dealing with now. When I first worked in the field, folks were not allowed to be released from incarceration to homeless shelters. But that also goes with folks coming out of psychiatric services. We're not allowed either. Now it is the default, and certainly it's not ideal, but I think we work a really great collaboration. And Casey's a one-person show. We recognize that, but her strengths and the strengths of this program since 2007 is the collaboration, working with a lot of players, with the county mental health, with housing providers, with substance abuse providers, with Department of Social Services, and also law enforcement at the table. The question I have, and when I was really involved with the task force personally, was that reentry really targeted folks who had certain vulnerabilities. Either they had special needs while incarcerated and need to be accommodated for, or were high recidivists and scored as potentially high recidivists. We get tons of people who ring our doorbell at the shelter. We sheltered 55 people whose last night stay was in state incarceration. Not all of them come from the reentry task force. Folks just paroled, have no place to go, and they come to Joseph's House first. And all the homeless services are well taxed. The question I'm asking now is that still a priority system for enrollment in reentry task force work? And if it is, do we have a good sense of really what the scale is above the 120 some folks who are prioritized for enrollment is?
I don't know, based on my time speaking with Casey, that she is really turning folks away. I think she is accommodating anyone who wants help. I think the only people that she has had to say, I cannot work with you, are the folks that repeatedly don't keep appointments and that just don't seem vested in the options. My understanding is that at this point, anybody who wants Casey's help gets it, and she finds a way to make it work as best she can.
But again, in that case, they have to know about it.
Exactly. I think that might be.
So that's the rub, yes.
Right, right. That might be what we need to figure out, is if they're not hearing about it before they're released, how as a community can we make this happen? And then, of course, take the step when it does become that there are more and more people who need our services. What can we do to make sure we can provide them?
So I want to double what Chris said. I think housing is a top list of most of social ailments these days. And I think that I would certainly endorse that we just need a lot more housing. Right now, we're using temporary funds called rapid rehousing funds to get folks as quick as possible out of the shelter, connected into employment, as Casey's real good at, and using rapid rehousing funds as a transition into stability. But a lot of times that's not enough. Having a longer term transitional housing like we had in the old days, I think is warranted.
So it sounds like there's two takeaways here. One is the perennial problem of communication, making sure that everybody is aware of these services. I think Renee might have raised it in our Monday meeting. So I put that on the list for, when we talk about communication, making sure people are aware of services, that this is included. And the other, it sounds like the housing component might be the weak link in the reentry program. And it sounded like Chris and Mary Pat had some, maybe not a breakthrough moment there, but some spark went off talking about collaborating on that.
Mayor, I do have Casey on this call. If there's anything that she could clarify with respect to Kevin's question, she'd be happy if someone can allow her to speak. I don't know how to do that.
John, is that something you can do?
She's on the call now.
Before
everyone.
Go
ahead.
Before Casey speaks, I just want to throw in one additional element that has become kind of somewhat clear to me as I listen to the conversation. And another element is trust. You have the people going to the system that locked them up to come out and help them do better. And so I think an alternative might be needed for those who are not trusting and going back to the people that put them away in the first place.
Thank you, Renee. I also heard a question about funding, the question of whether the funding will continue to be there to support the position. So I just would add that to our list.
Okay. So Renee, I absolutely agree with you. When we're working with individuals who are coming home from incarceration, trust is an absolute imperative thing that we need to be able to build. And one of the ways that I really structure my program is that it has to be a voluntary thing. I don't work with people because they're mandated to me. I work with people because they want to be able to work with me. So that really, I think, does kind of start building a foundation of trust. It's obviously not the only component that I work with, but that's definitely one of the things that I think really does work to my advantage. For Kevin, when he was talking about the number of individuals who are coming home, I don't have the statistics for 2020 yet, but I can say in 2019, I worked with 152 individuals who were coming home from incarceration to Rensselaer County, and 179 people were released to Rensselaer County that year from a state incarceration. So I worked with just about 85 to 90% of those individuals coming home. And what happens is there's so much turnover in docs as far as offender rehabilitation coordinators to educate the individuals who are incarcerated, that word about the task forces is just not there. It's not prevalent enough. So we really do try to reach out to each of the state correctional facilities to make sure that they're aware. There's 20 DCJS funded task forces throughout New York State. And we want to make sure that anyone who is interacting with those individuals while they are incarcerated are making sure that they know that if they're in a county or coming home to a county that has a task force, that they know that they're accessible to us. I mail literature to each of the facilities every year, updated information so that they know who we are, what we do, and the services that we have. And I want to agree with Kevin in that we are absolutely a success in Rensselaer County because of the partnerships and the community organizations that I work with. I have excellent relationships with Joseph's House. They're a part of our case conference committee. Rensselaer County DSS is a part of our conference committee. Rensselaer County Mental Health is a part of that. So we really do work together. I have phenomenal collaboration with so many different agencies. Unity House is one of them. Just so many agencies and organizations that are available to the individuals who are coming home that we can work with and really make sure that any of the services or any of the needs that they have, we can meet and we can address that. And there's some type of program or service available to them to make sure that they do have the best chance of not returning to the life that they came from, and making sure that we're decreasing the risk of recidivism. As far as funding, as Mary Pat had mentioned, unfortunately, we were very late in receiving information from DCJS this year stating that we were actually going to have a grant. So Mary Pat was very gracious in allowing us to continue the work, really unknown for about 3 months whether or not we were even going to have a task force program that was state funded. But we did receive notice from DCJS. However, we're not sure what the full allocation will be. Across the state, programs are being cut 20%. So that is what I am anticipating, but we won't know the exact number of what our funding will be until April of this year.
If I could just ask one more question, I'm not sure it's terribly relevant, but I'm curious. When the state releases people from prison, do they release them to the county where they were convicted, the county they identify as their home, the county where the state decides they're going to send you? I'm just curious as to know what sort of supports, not legal, but familial supports they have in communities they're released to. Where do they, when the state releases somebody from a big prison up north, where do they go? How do they decide what county they go to?
That's a great question. And that's really a case-by-case situation. Individuals, while they're incarcerated, propose an address to where they can be released to. And if they are being released on parole, the parole officer will verify that address and see if it is an address that is going to be a safe and secure resident for that individual to return home to. If DOCS determines that that's not an address that would be conducive for the individual to stay at, then they look at they would look at where the county of the crime that was committed. So oftentimes a lot of the individuals that are coming home who are undomiciled in Rensselaer County did commit the crime in Rensselaer County. They also will look at previous addresses to see where that individual lied and where they might have ties to the community so that they do have a better chance of forming those relationships in the community to make sure that they have more connection to where they're going to be released to. But that is definitely a case-by-case scenario.
Okay.
Hi, Casey, it's Laura Bauer.
Laura.
You run a really great program, and I know our department's worked with you on offender workforce development, job fairs and things like that. So I do see the work that you do, and it's great. You don't work with juveniles, and when I mentioned reintegration the other night, we have been trying to plan for youth now coming out of detention or longer stays of detention with raise the age in effect. And what we recognized is that reintegration, the whole process has to start the day it's decided they're going to go into a facility. So the planning and coordination with OCFS has to start then to work on programming and work on making the connections back to the community, whether it's with family, friend, a caregiver who is going to be there when they're released to continue with with the work. What was happening a lot of times before is a lot of great work was going on with the youth inside a facility, and then they're released back to a school system where their education was interrupted, and getting back up to speed and maybe even entering that again isn't even a possibility. So right now we are working to create a plan. I know in our department, and of what the reintegration process will be and what our part will be in that. So we're probation and we're not parole, so we don't supervise the youth coming out of a placement facility. They're monitored by the JD Pins unit at Social Services, but we want to make sure that going in, that the facilities have all of the information that they can have on a youth, using risk needs assessments and any of the information that we have to give them a heads up on what type of programming that would be of benefit to the youth to make them successful when they would return to us. One of the things I didn't mention this the other night, but when a youth who's been in a lot of trouble, they come back home, I think there's a tendency for a lot of people to say, oh, that's the kid who's always in trouble, and to maybe not embrace that kid and accept him back into communities or different programs. I know kids who are on probation with us, we've sometimes referred them to programs. And if they're seen as, a troublemaker or cause an issue, they're kicked out of the program rather than maybe embraced a little tighter to keep them in, to keep them out of, because the whole purpose is so they're not out on the street, connecting with another a family, quote unquote, and doing some bad things. But that's all I wanted to say on the reintegration thing. Thanks.
Can I just ask another simple question? Because again, not knowing all of the programs. So when you talk about releasing back to the county of the crime where it was committed, and going back to kind of what Laura just talked about success rate for the if they're, and I guess that's my question is there a concern for falling back into the bad habits of the community of where that happened as well too? And is there a way that we can, and maybe you have that in place, working with mental health and working with the partners that we do have to help create a safety net for them as well too, so that they don't get back into bad behaviors or bad habits? What's that support system around them look like? Because I think that would be hard, you know what I mean, to sit and turn around, and Troy's not a big city either. It's not like you can get lost in the city. So, I think that would be one of the challenges I would see, and perhaps there already is things in place for that.
That is absolutely one of the biggest challenges that we have, is when somebody comes home to an area that they are familiar with, they tend to go back to what they've always known. So that's where we really kind of rely heavily on different types of peer mentoring programs. And we try to set them up with different services to ensure that they can be as successful as possible. So we'll even work to try to get somebody, if there's like a substance use issue, we'll try to work with them to be, released from the facility to a residential program or to an inpatient program, to ensure that they have the tools necessary to be as successful as possible. And sometimes we do look into the possibility of getting them transferred to a different county so that they're not back where they're used to doing what they're doing and doing illegal things, to try to keep them out of that trouble. That's not always the easiest thing, but that sometimes is a solution. But Monica, that's absolutely something that we do address, and it is a problem.
So I guess as a community member, but I'm looking at Starlita. Thank you. I'm so excited to see you, Starlita. Happy to see you up and going. So everybody knows the program at the YWCA. They just have such a phenomenal just a re-entry to everything program, and I know that they do a lot of good work. Is there, I'm going to say, the male counterpart of that are we looking at that anywhere in our community where there is, the ready to work programs and all these other things, whereas the housing, it's kind of like the step by step and the hand up, to be able to get people out and moving and going. And that's what the YW is a hallmark of, actually. And I'm wondering if, as we're talking about these housing opportunities, I think that is something that would be certainly something that we should take a look at, but it's a holistic approach to it, and making sure that if it's emergency housing, they graduate up into, a little bit different housing, and, making sure they're taking care of the family unit as well.
So one of the ways I approach things holistically, I'm a workforce development specialist. So I went through 180 hours for a nationally recognized credential in order to facilitate what they call ready, set, work groups. And we do look at it as a holistic approach. We address issues such as homelessness in that group. We make sure that we know that people are not going to be able to get and maintain employment if they don't know where they're going to lay their head at night. We work with them to overcome barriers. So we work with people, we advocate for DSS services. We make sure they have their health insurance and their SNAP benefits. Things just as simple as giving somebody a bus pass so they can get to and from the job interview. We make sure that they have appropriate clothing to wear to the job interview. We talk to them about how to talk to an employer about a previous conviction, or talk to them about different incentives. So we educate not only our participants, but also employers about the federal bonding program and the work opportunity tax credit. And the job fair that is coming up on March 24th, it is a virtual job fair, but we are looking at it again in a holistic approach so that we again know that there are barriers when somebody's looking for employment. So not only are we going to have employers there that will work with justice involved individuals, but we're also going to have community-based organizations to have resources there that will assist in overcoming some of those barriers, the basic childcare, transportation, things like that, so that people are able to get that employment and maintain that employment and be able to be successful in their own right.
So Monica, Father Young used to have both formal and informal, we call parole houses. Those contracts have been lost. As far as having, site-based like the YWCA has, with sort of one-stop shopping, residents, and all the support services for males, it doesn't exist.
So I'm glad both of you brought that up, because I was going to ask, and I'd really like to hear from Casey on this, if there were a model that doesn't exist right now, would it be scattered site housing, or would it be single site housing? Where you might have 10 to 15 to 20 people living in one location getting a whole range of support services, or would it be better to do that in a scattered site model, giving everything you know about that population? Because it could be done either way, potentially.
So Chris, I can answer that question. The Fortune Society down in New York City runs both. They have both site-based and scattered site. And just like the populations that you and I work with, some people flourish in site-based because they need that community. They need that on-site 24-hour supports. Other people have a difficult time with that intimacy, and they do better in scattered site. I think both are needed. I think in this community, because I've gone through citing 3 buildings in my career here in Troy. It's hard enough to get site-based community approval for folks with disabling conditions like mental illness. It would be very difficult, I would anticipate, to get site-based approval for folks in reentry. It might be practically an easier option to have it infused in a mixed community. Residents or a scattered site would probably be easier. I know, Casey, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, Kevin, I absolutely agree with you. I think both are imperative to the success of our individuals. And I think that it's very challenging when we're looking at housing, as your employees can attest to, because I reach out to landlords on a regular basis, and I'm constantly coming up against people who will say, no, I don't want to rent to somebody who's on parole. And that makes it very challenging because, the individuals that I work with, they're not just parolees. They're somebody's mother, their father, their sister, their brother. These are family members and members of our community that really we need to set a foundation for so that we can bring them back to our community and really allow them to be successful. And that is what really attributes to our safer communities, which is what this committee and what everybody's really looking for. And to have housing in Rensselaer County, specifically for the reentry population, even if it was just, a short-term thing until people got on their feet enough to be able to go out and get their own apartment, that would be a dream come true. But I do think that we need to look at it as kind of sporadic sites, as well as having a place where, they have community services available to them and maybe more structure, because some people need that and they thrive in that environment. And like Kevin said, other people, they need to kind of be on their own, and they don't work well being around other people. So I think having that variety, having those options would be optimal.
And maybe we can all agree to follow up, because we can go on talking about this for quite some time, but I think we definitely have some follow-up to do here, because there are funding opportunities available to meet this need. And if we work together, we can get it done.
I just want to add, we are severely lacking in housing for transition age youth. A lot of kids, they burned a lot of bridges, which probably gets them into the system to begin with. They're sleeping on friends' couches. Nobody wants them at home because they're, a handful or whatever. But there's no place for them.
Laura, is that age group that Steve talked about last night or
Yes.
Monday, the 15 to 24? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we've had some really good conversation on this, some good connections between different members of the committee, and some things to follow up on. I think one of the other topics that we wanted, and Casey, thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise in the work that you're doing. I think one of the other topics that came up on Monday night that we wanted to have some discussion around was the idea of responding to mental health or to welfare calls, and how could some of that be reimagined. And we wanted to hear from the committee, what were some of your thoughts around that specific area?
Tamara, it's Kathy Coons. May I respond to that? Thank you. I just wanted to share with the group that there is a mental health mobile crisis service that does serve Rensselaer County. We share that service with 4 other counties, and it has been underfunded, but we took whatever funding we could get to get something launched. So that program serves children, youth, and adults. They work very closely with our mental health department and with Samaritan Hospital. It's a program that is out of Parsons in Albany. So one thing that we would very much like to see over time is an ability to have the mobile crisis service be more available and accessible, not only to community members, but also to law enforcement to work alongside them. We have had some success with that on a limited basis because the funding is so limited. This service is now a Medicaid reimbursable service. It hadn't been before. We're hopeful that with the provider being able to bill Medicaid, that would bring some more funding into the program and allow for greater expansion. So the program is not home-based at all in Rensselaer County, but they are able to quickly respond to Rensselaer County calls. It is also not a 24/7 operation yet, and we're hoping that over time that will happen. We're hoping that by the 1st of 2022, we would see it as a 24/7 operation. So there are several models around the country of programs where there's mobile crisis type service that works alongside law enforcement. There is one out in the western part of the country called Cahoots. That model actually dispatches a mobile crisis type response right out of the 911 call center. The 911 call center would triage the call, determine whether or not what the level of risk is and whether or not law enforcement is needed on the scene, and can actually divert the call from law enforcement. So that's one model that can be looked at. That's also a model that actually just very recently Schenectady County started to experiment with. There's also some other models where there's mobile crisis that's kind of on call and available to support law enforcement when they're responding to these types of calls. One of our speakers tonight mentioned a model out of Denver, Colorado, which I'm not familiar with, but beginning tomorrow we'll start to research it. And that's, they said it was STAR out of Denver, Colorado. So I'll start to take a look at that. There's also a model that has been launched up in Essex County. I'm actually meeting with Essex County in a couple of weeks. And that's a law enforcement mental health referral service that happens. And I'll be getting more information about that, and we'll be happy to share that with the group when I have more info. I will say there are some situations where under mental health statute, law enforcement is really utilized by mental health providers to help manage community situations. So there's one area of the law is under the mental hygiene law in New York State. It's called the 945. And a 945 order can be issued by myself, or under the statute, I can designate certain providers in the community who have particular credentials to be able to be a designee of mine as the Commissioner of Mental Health in the county to issue 945 orders. The 945 order is an order for involuntary transport to bring an individual who exhibits potential danger to themselves or others to be picked up by law enforcement and brought involuntarily to the hospital for crisis evaluation. That's not an inpatient admission. It's an evaluation, a crisis evaluation that in our community takes place at Samaritan Hospital in the crisis unit located at the emergency department. And under that statute, there are certain requirements for reporters who I can take a report from and be able to determine whether or not there's enough evidence to issue one of those orders. Troy PD works very closely with us, as do other municipal PDs and the Sheriff's Department here in Rensselaer County. But I would say the bulk of the 945 orders are managed by Troy PD because it's where there's a population center in the county. And we really work very closely with Troy PD in doing and managing those pickup orders. And they can be very difficult. So mental health has, as you know, we have limited funding. And this year in the governor's budget, there is a proposed reduction in state aid to mental health services. But the promising piece we have before us is that the mobile crisis service is now a Medicaid reimbursable service. So that's a promising move forward. Also in the governor's budget is proposed the establishment of something called crisis stabilization centers. Now, the Office of Mental Health has not yet released information about what these centers would look like and how many they're seeking to launch in the state. So that's an unknown factor. I've actually submitted some questions to the Office of Mental Health that I'm hoping to have some answers to in the coming weeks about this. But the Crisis Stabilization Center is intended, my understanding is, to divert from needing to use the emergency department and to have kind of a freestanding center in the community that law enforcement might be able to help link folks to for further assessment and services. So more to come on that, but there's definitely an emphasis now in the state to focus on building a continuum of crisis care for persons with mental illness.
So Kathy, and I don't know if someone else in the committee, but how does that, you spoke about the mental health component, how does that link to the welfare piece, the child welfare that was spoken about on Monday night quite a bit?
So to my knowledge, mobile crisis has never really been accessed to be present on the scene when, let's say, there's could potentially be a child protective removal or some other child welfare type service. But that's something we could look into with the mobile crisis team to see if that's something they would be able to do. So that can have some further investigation. I'm happy to look into that some more.
Kathy, would we have to do additional training at the dispatch level at 911 in order to work in that kind of moment?
Yes, there would have to be training, and Parsons is developing training right now that they're piloting in Schenectady County. So that's something that I think over time we'd be able to look into and determine whether or not that could be a possibility. What the initial information is that's coming out of Schenectady County is that it's only about right now is very new. Only about 1% of the calls are being diverted, but they're hoping that will be growing over time as the system becomes more familiar with this and more comfortable with that. So, but whether it's diverted or not, mobile crisis can be a service that could support law enforcement when law enforcement is responding to a mental health call, or it could be a service that could divert. There are some situations that have happened where law enforcement's been on a call, mobile crisis has responded to that call, and then law enforcement's able to leave and mobile crisis takes it from there. So there are some I think each situation has its own unique facets that mobile crisis can help to assist with.
So I don't think that we're in a position to include or make enough progress on this to put it in our plan for April 1st. But I do think what I would like to see is a group who explores this a little more deeply. It's of great interest to me. I don't know all the models, obviously, that Kathy knows of, but I did read up on Cahoots, and this is not a novel or experimental program. Cahoots has been around for 30 years now, I think 31 years. And over that time, they've refined their ability to triage 911 calls. And I think it's close to 20% of the calls that come in are diverted to this mobile mental health unit. They're on duty 24/7. And they responded, it's a little larger city than us, but they responded to, I think, some 25,000 calls last year. And of those 25,000, only in 169 cases did they need to bring in the police. So it demonstrates that that there's a great many calls that could be handled without police intervention. And that's better for the person who's calling, it's better for the police department, and certainly better for the taxpayer. So I would like to look into this further. I'd like to take those conversations to the next stage. I will point out the irony that others have noted that, the state wants us to reinvent policing, but they're cutting funding to everything that can help us do that, it seems. You don't need to agree or shake your head in case somebody's watching, but anyway, I'd like to explore options to fund, see how we might fund something like that. See if there's the need and it's worthwhile.
Okay. Patrick, I have a question for Chief Bryan related to all of this. Do we, or Deputy Dan, do we have an idea of what percentage of calls come into that the police respond to that are mental health, emotionally distressed persons calls? Do we know the percentage of those calls?
I don't as I sit here right now, but I can find that out for you. But I can just tell you that, so in addition to 945 orders that Kathy mentioned, we have 960 orders, which are the medical professional orders for involuntary transport. And then if we go on a call and the person is dangerous to themselves or others, under the mental hygiene law, there's the 941 commitment as well. So there's a significant amount of mental health calls that we go on. To Kathy's point about the mobile crisis, our members absolutely request them. And it goes to her point that they're underfunded and under-resourced because a lot of times they're not available either by the time of day, so staffing levels, or the fact that they're scattered and covering 4 counties. If there's an opportunity to be assisted more by a mobile crisis team, or we have one specific just to Rensselaer County, I think that would be a tremendous help to not only the people in crisis, but to the whole system. And we would be all for that.
Thank
Mayor?
you, Chief. That's one of my wishes, is that we would have them stationed in our county and available to you. And Chief, I know that in 2019, I received some data from your department and you responded to approximately 700 mental health calls in 2019.
Mayor?
Yes.
I would like to actually respectfully request that we include something in regards to this in the committee report, because I know that it is something that is, and I don't know what that looks like at this point in time as far as how we word it, but I know that it, especially when we just said 700 of them in one particular year, and understanding the challenges with the financials. But I know that whether it's partnering with Casey or trying to partner with our social service agencies, I think it's certainly something that we could explore easily. But I think it's important to include it in the plan in some form or fashion.
I'd be happy to help craft some language for that.
We'd be happy to accept your help.
I think there's also been an emphasis on the fact that the plan is going to be something that's going to be worked on together over the course of time. And so I think it makes sense to have some components that are around, we need to explore this and then start to put some pieces in place. I mean, that was something that really stood out to me from Monday's meeting, that sounded like there was an interest on the part of the committee and then also the coalition of Black leaders to continue these conversations. Do we want to, in the interest of, we are at about 8 o'clock. Could we use about another 15 minutes to have some response from the committee to the 5 folks that provided public comment tonight? Are there things that stood out? Anything that the committee members would like to respond to or comment?
So certainly the theme of race, privilege and inequity has been coming up both days, but it was really here today, as well as LGBT rights. So diversity, inclusion, equity, I think are major themes from what I heard tonight.
So it was interesting to me about when Doris brought up the community policing and if the community actually understands what that is and what they think that is. So that's something we might need to explore maybe at the neighborhood level, just to ask the simple question if people actually understand what community policing means. I just thought that was really an interesting concept for her. And Doris is longstanding in the community. So it was a good question that maybe perhaps we might need to ask, because it gets tossed around a lot. And I know the chief has always talked about the philosophy of community policing versus the unit. So it might be something we need to kind of like put some feelers out for.
Hey, Tamara, it looks like Doris has her hand up. I don't know, are we allowing our participants or attendees to contribute again? Because it looks like she wants to say something.
I will defer. I think that to the committee, I think it would be fine to have her come back in, but that's.
I agree.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Doris.
Thank you for allowing me this moment here. I just want to say thank you to all the people who are working with mental health and housing. They're all providing very valuable services the community needs. But I'm a little lost as to where we are going with this, with all our outside conversations, because yes, we have a lot of social ills, but I thought our main focus was, what are we going to present to the state as an agreement, as a compact of all interested parties of how we're going to do our policing reform. I looked on the website for the PPRC, and I'm not seeing anything that the collaborative has put out to ask the citizens what they want or ideas of what you've discussed. I thought somebody said at one point in time there was a survey with questions. I've looked for the survey, I can't find it. I just want to know, we're going to hold these forums, and I'm hoping that the forums will stay true to what this collaborative is supposed to be doing at this time, the things that we're supposed to be addressing, and that when we come out of this, we come out of here with clear and concise solutions of how we're going to proceed forward. Because we can sit here and talk about all the social ills, but in the end, what I thought we were here to do was to come up with some clear ideas with the police department, with the citizens, with the collaborative. This is what we agree our community needs to do, how we can do it, what we're going to allow, what we can accept, how we're going to make this work. And I'm not getting, for me, I'm speaking for me personally, I'm not getting that right now for the 2 sessions I have watched. So I'm just looking for a little more clarity here of where we're going with this, and who has what are we offering? Because we can have a whole bunch of conversations about the different social issues, but I don't see that being, I think we had one objective here to address, and I don't see that we're going in that direction. That's my question.
Thank you, Doris.
Tamara?
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question based on one of the comments. One of the speakers, I think it was Raphael, asked about police records. And back in, I think it was this past summer, Section 50A was repealed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. So I just want to know, where do we stand? This could be for chief, it could be for the mayor, it could be, for anyone who knows, but where do we stand with the release of police records in compliance with the repeal of that law?
I'd have to have a conversation with Corp Counsel. I know he's looking at that, and I know we're going through records. I don't know where we stand on it at this point without involving Rick in the discussion, though.
Okay, but I would definitely, I'd like to follow up on that one, because I know multiple council members have certainly asked about it. And we should also find out how other municipalities are approaching that, because we're certainly not alone. I mean, the law was changed for all of New York State, so we should figure out, the best way to make this information available without compromising, personal information on any of our employees.
Tamara?
Yes.
To dovetail what Monica said on community policing, I do think that we definitely need to include a good segment on community policing, because the other night I found Jerry's comments especially interesting. I believe he was the one who said, it's great having folks, the community police at the events, but it's not just stopping, it's interacting. So, when we do talk about community policing, because it is thrown around quite a bit, and I did throw it out the other night when I talked about my dad walking the beat, but there is a big umbrella of community policing. So I think we need to deep dive into that subject, because obviously that goes back to what the mayor said, which is building trust. building transparency, getting our police force more involved with neighborhood activities, which Brian has, truly tried to move forward over the past year and a half. So I'd like to see a real emphasis on that. And I think dominoing with that, Jerry and Deborah, I believe, also mentioned tearing down some of those walls and barriers and how better to communicate and have a communications plan. So I'd like to see a real focus on that.
So the community piece, community policing piece, and then also understanding what does that look like? So there's multiple definitions of that, and what does that look like? So clarifying as a committee how that fits in and defining it so that it's understood. And then also for you, the emphasis on the communication plan.
Right. And, moving forward, how do we build, but not just, have a police officer, what was mentioned the other night, which Brian is doing now, stopping by ballpark, that's great. But we need more investment. I talked about maybe an incentive plan to maybe get some of the younger officers to actually live in our neighborhoods. I think that obviously creates more investment, creates neighborhood partnerships, having ownership in that neighborhood. But anyway, I do think communication, community policing, and taking down those barriers are huge.
It seems to me that in both sessions, the affinity group and tonight, we had a heavy concentration of concerns, issues, perceptions about racial inequity, racial justice, systematic racism. And I'd really like to see us at some point take that on, as hard as a conversation as it might be. When I say take it on, I mean take it on for the institutions we represent, because it is, as I said before, I believe it's everywhere. And we got to start acknowledging that and say what we're going to do about it if we're going to make our systems better and more racially equitable. So that would be my input for what I'd really like to see us take on at some point, a serious conversation about it.
And to piggyback off of what Chris just said, I think it's imperative that we start at that point. Like, we can't move forward. Like, I also believe and have felt systemic racism in where I live, and it's here. We have to acknowledge that it's here, and each and every single last one of us has to do our part to eradicate racism and the institution of it within our personal stuff that we have, our professional stuff that we have, our organizations. And it's not I'm going to start today and I'm going to be done with it next year. This is an ongoing process that we all have to be committed to. We all have to call each other out when we see it, when we feel it. And it also has to be done in a safe, caring respect. We can't just keep sweeping stuff underneath the rug and then say we're going to have open communication, we're going to have open trust, we're going to have transparency. Because without us acknowledging the foundation of our city has a racial tone to it, we're not going to get any better. We have to rip up this tree that is bearing bad fruit because the roots of it is bad. So I just think that we have to get to a point where we have to really be honest with ourselves and take a deep stance on, we are going to make Troy a better, inclusive, diverse community for everyone. And that's from our police down to the populations that we all serve.
So I'm going to make a bold statement here. Assuming there's time after our next open meeting, Chris, would you want to lead a discussion on that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the best one to lead it, but I will certainly work to try
Maybe
to.
you could work with Starlita.
Yeah, and maybe we can, and maybe Renee, and maybe we should have people who are experiencing this directly rather than people who are learning about it participate. But yeah, we'll work together to get something to lead a discussion.
Absolutely.
I'd like, if I could, just to take a minute to respond to Doris's last question. And I don't think that we can talk about reinventing or reimagining police without taking up all of these other issues. These issues are holes in our social fabric. And what has happened historically is that whatever falls through the hole becomes a police problem. It's unfair to those who fall through the hole, and it's unfair to our police department to expect them to have the ability to juggle so many different disciplines and demand that they be perfect in every interaction. We have to approach this as a community differently if we're going to reinvent policing, if we're going to change the footprint of policing. We need to address these other deficiencies in our programs. So yes, we need to talk about policing specifically, but that can't be done in isolation of these discussions. And I think that is a flaw of the design of the PRRC at the state level. So that's, I guess, my response to Doris. I don't want to go on needlessly on that.
Tamara?
Yes.
I just wanted to thank Mary Pat
Well,
for
it is not
talking about
serious
that
as I thought
program.
it was, but it's probably bad.
I didn't know a lot about it, and it's amazing what Casey does. And I saw the article in the Record, didn't really know a whole lot about it. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Tamara?
Yes.
I just want to say, and I think just to kind of go back to the mayor's response and Doris's question and the other people's questions as well too. You know, I think it's the ability for all of us, going back to our opening session for our group about listen, engage. You know, I think that it is our role as the committee to listen to the community, to listen to these affinity groups and the groups that are going to present to us, to hear what their concerns are, what their recommendations are, and then be able to formulate from that to create the plan. So I think that I just want to make sure people understand that that's what our role is right now, is to listen to you. So we are at the listening stage. We're also at kind of writing and scoping and tracking and all that other stuff, but our role right now is to listen to the community, and that's why we want you to come and talk. So I appreciate you, Doris, and everybody else that came and talked tonight, but make sure when you do come, we want suggestions. We want to hear you so that we can formulate the best plan for our community going forward.
And I wonder if that's a good place to remind people that written comments can be received by the committee. They will be reviewed. And if you're listening now and, you know, have reflections or have ideas about what's been shared, or think that the emphasis needs to be in a different location, please email or send in a letter, and it will be reviewed by the committee, and it will be brought into this conversation as well. Does anyone else on the committee have something that you'd like to share tonight? Anything else, any other reflections on what we heard?
I would just wanted to follow up on one question that I think Doris raised. She asked about a survey and whether or not there's a survey. I'm aware of a survey through the county for the sheriff's department, but I don't have an answer on this for the city.
We're still
So Kathy, as far as there has been a conversation in regards to doing a community survey, it is something that we're looking at the mechanism to do that the best way. and hopefully get that out. It's a conversation that we're trying to have to figure out the best format of that to be able to get it out and get it back in the scope that we need it. So we'll continue to keep working on that. And it's tight because it's a tight time frame and be able to pull that data around. We want to do it. It's just trying to find the right format. Tamara, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, we've been looking at different instruments and trying to figure out the best one that could, you could use it one time and then maybe resurvey at a later time. So we've been exploring some options. So if we could bring some more about that to the next committee meeting.
I've been sitting here trying to decide whether I want to say more, and I do just want to say one more thing, and it leads to part of what Doris was saying, and a little bit of the confusion. And when we're having our discussions, and Monica said this, we're here to listen. And based on some of the discussion I've heard, it sounds like we were writing the plan before we even complete listening to everyone. So I would like for us going forward to not start writing the document until we get all of that information together. And one of the things that I was really concerned about is when we asked DA Donnelly to talk about the different programs. Well, we only talked about the one program, the re-entry, and we talked almost in a defensive way about how great the program is, and that's not what the question really was. So I'd like for us to kind of answer the question, what is the program? How many people participate? We got some of that information out, but just to stay a little more neutral about how we're going forward with this process. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Renee. I think it's good to remind us around the listening piece, especially because we still have more affinity groups coming up, 2 more public forums. So if there's not any other comments for tonight, I think we could just look at what we have coming up, which is that we have our next affinity meeting next Monday evening, and then we'll have another public forum on Wednesday. And so for those that are listening, again, go to the website. If there's anyone that would like to come and speak to the committee, there's a sign up form there. John, do you have any other administrative pieces that we should share right now?
Nope, just that the registration for the next round of meetings has not been posted yet, but it will be posted no later than 24 hours before the upcoming meeting. So those links will hopefully be up shortly.
Okay. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you for any closing.
I would just like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank those who are watching tonight, those who commented. Again, urge people to submit written comments if you can do that. It's part of our listening process. So all good comments tonight. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Take care.